I played baseball when I was a kid, so that took a lot of hand-eye coordination, and I think that helped me with my football, and I just enjoyed playing, and I guess it was a natural thing for me. I was always reasonably quick when I was young, and while I did work on my speed, I did sprint training and that once I started playing at grade level, but I guess it probably did come pretty natural, but it wasn't something that I took for granted. I did work a little bit harder at certain areas, and well, a lot of the guys that I played with would probably disagree with that and say, well, we know how you train, but it's always had a ball in my hand, as did most of the guys. We used to actually have a cricket bat and a tennis ball, and we'd just sort of do slips catches. The batsman would be there, guys would throw the ball, and his job would be to hit the ball towards slips, and I guess that probably helped us as well, you know, the hand-eye coordination. And at that age, it was always a goal was to play for South. But as I got older and playing 16s and 17s, started to realise that the opportunity for me to play first grade football and eventually maybe get to South was to play for the local side first, and that being Parramatta, and because I played all my junior football at Guildford, which is a junior club in the Parramatta district. I realised then that, yeah, that was where I had to go, was Parramatta. I played some junior rep football for Parramatta, in Jersey Flegg, and then I was actually trialling for the President's Cup, which was under 21s at that stage, and we had a trial game against guys that were trialling for grade in the under 23s, and after that game, or after that weekend, I received a phone call from Ron Fernley, who was the coach of the under 23s then, and he asked me to come across and try out for grade. So away I went and got there, and as I said, it was a bit of a shock. It was something that was unexpected, but certainly good. It was a great place to be. The first probably 4 or 5 weeks of the competition, I sat on the bench for the under 23s. And there was even a stage where I was tempted to go back to Guildford and play in the A-grade competition just to get a game under my belt. But I was fortunate enough to get a start in the 23s, and I think I played probably 4 or 5 games there, and then it was against St George at Cogra Oval. I played 2 games in one day. Played, I think, on the wing in the 23s, come off and went straight back out and played on the wing in reserve grade, scored a try, and the following week was selected in reserve grade, and then 6 weeks later made my debut in first grade. So it was sort of a big jump from C grade 12 months earlier into first grade, and it was a surprise. It was a bit of a shock to the system, but you mentioned Mick Cronin, and it was great playing outside Mick, and I've always said that, and I feel that my career was able to get off to a good start because I had him playing inside me, and he certainly looked after me. I was 19 years of age and very inexperienced at that level of football, and I'm sure at times Mick probably would have passed the football to his outside support, but because he knew it was me and I was inexperienced, he held the football and probably copped a few more knocks than he probably should have, but he certainly looked after me and made it very easy for me to adjust to first grade. Jack was great. I always remember when they announced that Jack Gibson was going to be the coach, I always thought that he was a real taskmaster, and I had the feeling that, you know, whatever he said you had to do, and if you didn't do it right, he'd come down hard on you. But he was completely the opposite sort of man, and a gentle sort of guy, and a dry sense of humour, and very honest, and that was the thing I liked about him. Jack would sit you down and he would tell you straight how he thought you were playing, and you knew where you stood, but he read his players very well. I always remember a story where I'd just come back from the Kangaroo tour in '82 and went straight into training, never had a rest, and it was midway through '83 and I wasn't playing all that well, and Jack could see that, and I arrived at training and we were training at Granville Park, and I got out of the car and I was told that Jack wanted to see me in his office. Well, you know, I went weak at the knees. I just didn't want to go in there. I thought, oh, geez, you know, what have I done? And he sat me down and he just told me he didn't want me to play that weekend. And I hadn't missed a game for 2 years. And I said, oh, you know, I'd like to play. And Jack said, well, mate, if you want to play, you'll be playing reserve grade. Of course, the decision was made pretty quickly for me. I said, okay, I'll have the week off. and he told me to go home. That day it was a Tuesday night. He told me to get in my car, go home, had the week off, don't even go to the game, and which I did, and I went back to training the following Tuesday night, and then from there on in, started playing really well. And he realised that I was just tired, I'd had enough football, I needed a week off and have a break, and did that, and I learned from that experience. A similar thing happened to me in '87 after touring in '86 with the Kangaroos, and because of that experience I was able to realise what I had to do, and while I didn't have a week off, I just knew that it would be a matter of time and I'd be right. But you know, he just knew. He knew how to read players, and I've never forgotten it.
Did he treat the other players the same way?
Yeah, I mean that was Jack. The thing about him too is that he knew everybody, from the fullback in first grade down to the guy sitting on the bench in the under-23s. He knew everybody and knew the way they played. And I know a lot of people, Parramatta supporters, would you know, they used to know every player that played in their teams, but there would be guys that would come on in first grade that people would never have heard of, and they were playing in the 23s earlier on in that day, and Jack had seen how they played, and I guess as a reward he had them shower and not to go home. They was told to stay, and then were told, you know, a little later on that you're sitting on the bench for first grade, and it was just a reward for the guys. And this was the sort of thing he did, and that's why I think players like to play for him, because of the way he treated them. He treated them with respect, and he demanded respect, and he got respect, of course, the way he treated you. And I think, you know, most players would agree. If Jack said, "We want you to run through that brick wall," you'd give it your best to try and get through it.
Wayne Pearce, what a fine physique this boy's got. And Kenny, oh well, that was a weak tackle. And these Australians are literally ripping holes through this Great Britain cover. And with 18 minutes gone, they go even further ahead by 28 points to 4.
I know the night of the grand final, when they announced the side, I went through quite a few different emotions. At one stage I was happy that I'd been selected to represent my country, and I was going away on a Kangaroo tour, and then probably 10 minutes later I started to think, geez, I'm going to be away from home for 3 months. And I'd never sort of done anything like that. I'd been away on end of season football trips, but never been away outside of the country and been away for that long, and I sort of just didn't know what to expect and what to think. And I was fortunate. I think there was probably 6 of us from Parramatta that got selected, so I had a lot of guys there that I knew. I was a relatively quiet sort of bloke. I never sort of went out of my way to introduce myself to people. It was more a case of they had to come to me, and then I'd start to talk to them. And so I didn't know a lot of the players. I knew who they were, but I didn't know them personally. And as I said, it was fortunate that there was a lot of 6 guys from Parramatta. So I spent a bit of time with them for the first week and a half, and got to know the other guys that were on the tour, the blokes from Queensland, of course the other guys that played in the Sydney clubs, and it was a very good tour. It was a learning experience for me. Bit of a shock to be playing in test matches. I'll admit, when I left to go over there, I expected to just play against the club teams and be in like what you'd call the B team, which were known as the Emus, and the team that played in the test matches were always the Kangaroos. And I expected to be an Emu, and was very fortunate to be playing well enough and get selected in the test match. And once we won the first test match, I guess it was always going to be difficult to change the team. I guess a dream come true, firstly to represent your country, but to play in a side like that was just so many great players. And the other thing was the fact I was playing alongside Steve Rogers, who, along with Mick Cronin, were 2 of my idols. As a youngster, I played a lot at 5'8", but towards the end of my junior career I was playing in the centres, and Mick Cronin and Steve Rogers were the 2 Australian centres, and I sort of idolised these 2 guys. I always thought that the perfect centre would be a guy that was as big and as strong as Mick Cronin, but as agile as Steve Rogers. And I modelled my game on both those guys, and here I was. I'd already achieved one thing by playing alongside Mick Cronin, who was one of my idols, and here I was now playing alongside Steve Rogers, and it was just a great team. It was Something, as I said, I never expected to be playing in a test match, and of course never thought that Wally Lewis, who I think was the vice captain at the time, would miss out on selection in the test team. And here I was the one that actually kept him out of the side. But in saying that, Wally was great about it. I mean, a lot of people would expect a player to be filthy with you and not want to talk to you and not associate with you, but Wally was the complete opposite. Always encouraged me, and we got on very well and sort of become friends from that tour on.
It's back for Sterling. A short pass for Kenny. Kenny for the line. Kenny scores for New South Wales.
I enjoyed playing against Wally because he was the best player in the world, you know, the best 5'8" in the world, and it sort of brought the best out in you when you're playing the best players. Terry Lamb was another one that I felt always brought the best out of me. I approached the game against Terry Lamb the same way as I approached the game against Wally Lewis. And Wally, you know, I wouldn't say, he wasn't easy to read, but the thing is we never really come in contact with each other that much in general play. It was mainly from a scrum. Because of the different styles that we had, I was always a little bit wider in general play than Wally. Wally was always, sometimes was first receiver for Queensland. I was never in that position. So from scrum plays, yeah, we used to come in contact with each other, but it was just something that I thought, well, I had to get up quick on Wally from a scrum, and the best I could do was try and take him ball and all and stand there with him and hope that the lock, whether it be Ray Price or Wayne Pearce, would get in and help me, because there's no way in the world I was going to be strong enough to take him, you know, ball and all, and do it all on my own. So because he was a very strong player, but that was just the way I approached the game. And we had some good sides when we played against Queensland, and we won the series in '85, and won it again in '86. So it wasn't a case of me being able to control Wally as the reason we won it. I played a part in the game where I was able to perform well against Wally and probably contain him a little more than some other 5'8" were able to do, but it was the rest of the side that I had around me that really helped us win the game, and they all did their jobs as I did mine, and that's why we were successful in those 2 years.
Centre of the field, so New South Wales have the option to go either side as Sterling puts a floater on. He gets it to Kenny. Kenny will get it out, and they're going to get it. Oh, great try. O'Connor for New South Wales off another Kenny pass.
There's a lot of talk about they were more passionate about it as well. Well, the sides I played in for New South Wales, as I said, we won it in '85 and '86, but I was there, experienced State of Origin in '83, '84, and we didn't win the series. But you couldn't tell me that there were any players in those two teams that weren't as passionate about playing for New South Wales as any Queenslander was playing in the maroon jersey. You know, we were just as passionate. We wanted to win the game, and I really do think the passionate side of it was all the media beat up, and it was just, I think, for Queenslanders to try and put something over New South Wales, and so that they were more passionate, and that's why they won the series. I mean, they didn't mention anything about they were more passionate about the game in 1985, about the series in 1985. They lost it, you know. So I think it was just a media beat up. But you know, all the guys I played with over the years in State of Origin all wanted to win the series and all wanted to play well, because back then the State of Origin series was a lead up. It was a trial game, I suppose, in a way, for a test jumper. So you weren't going out there just to run around for nothing. You were going out there to get the honour of playing for your country.
Farah underneath it well though, takes it, winds up with that familiar style and gets out of two. Farah out of two, out of three. Good run from Farah, still going. They finally fell him down, and that's a great run from Andrew Farah, showing plenty of determination, and that's what the Blues are about. They want to wrap this series up, and here's another break. New South Wales with a chance now as they run down, and Crusher Kyle will score, and that's about it for the Blues, let me tell you. A great try. Oh, Crusher underneath the post with a beauty. Boom. And that came from nothing. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Explosion running from New South Wales.
And it did get to the stage that State of Origin was probably more important, well, not more important, but it was a bigger type game for players, and it was something that everyone wanted to experience, more so than a test match. It was an unfortunate thing for rugby league, and it still is. I mean, I still believe players look at playing for Australia as the highlight of your career, and that is the ultimate goal, to play for your country. But as far as the atmosphere and the pressure, I guess, of a game, State of Origin is a game that you want to play in. That brings out the best in people. It's such a bigger game. I guess the rugby league supporters enjoy it. It's always going to be bigger, I guess, because Australia dominate so much in international rugby league. We have the best players in the world here. So you think about, you've got 13 of the best players in Queensland playing against 13 of the best players in New South Wales, 26 of the best players in the world playing against each other. You're going to have a great game. And that's what State of Origin's all about. International football, you've got 13 of the best players in the world up against probably 5 or 6 players that could probably hold their own with Australian players, but the rest of them couldn't. I think that's the difference.
Haddock, Young. Oh, intercept!
Back in the 80s and 70s, and I guess that created the characters. You know, there were guys that liked to go out and put the biff on straight away. You know, I'll never forget Steve Roach patting the referee on the top of the head. I mean, these were things that just made guys. People love to see that sort of thing, and Blocker was a larger-than-life character. You know, just the things he did. He was a very passionate man about his rugby league, and I guess that's why they do things they do, because of the passion they've got about the game. And at the time, they're probably not thinking about the consequences that would bring. They just go ahead and do things.
A build-up for Origin 1 for our guys was the biggest game that for a lot of the younger blokes that we'd ever had an opportunity. Myself, Chris Close, and Mel, we were only 18, 19-year-old kids. So for us, it was a dream come true to be playing alongside some of the biggest name players in the sport. For a lot of the other guys, like Beetson, you know, it was probably just something that he was coming back. He believed that he had plenty of pressure on him. I though, you know, had a situation that I had a lifeline thrown to me. I had a chance to prove myself finally playing in a representative game against some of the biggest names in rugby league. Some of the guys that were playing in that game probably felt the same way.
Now there's a sight to see. Big Artie in the maroon of Queensland and captain.
Look, Beetson inspired everybody in the Queensland jersey that night. We watched the way that he walked around in the dressing room prior to the match. We all sat nervously in the dressing room. You could just hear the studs just tapping away on the concrete before the game. We looked at Beetson just walking around. He had that famous flat cap on. He was walking around just taking his time, talking individually to players. Finally, he came around, sat down next to me, and I'll still remember the words that he said to me. He said, "Look, I'm not going to tell you lies. I haven't seen a lot of your football, but unless you could play, you wouldn't be in this team." And he put the cap on top of my head, and it was almost like a rubbish tin lid. It was that big. It went right around, and he just, you know, slapped me on the legs, and he said, "Son, you know, you can play footy. I've seen you score a couple of tries on tape." And he said, "Just go out and do your best. You won't let us down. I know that." And I felt 10 foot tall and bulletproof. You know, just having the confidence from Beetson. I went out there and I followed him around like a mongrel dog all night long. I don't think I played any of my individual game that night. I just followed Arthur Beetson around. I dreamed about running off one of Arthur Beetson's passes in the lead up to that game. And that's all I did. And I think Queensland's first try I took the pass from Arthur Beetson. He took it up, turned it around, threw the ball back to me. I passed it out to the Queensland back line and it went all the way out. And of course, Kerry Bostad scored it. And I believe it's the second loudest noise at Lang Park. It was only beaten by the sound that, of course, when Arthur Beetson was introduced to the crowd individually, that noise, that night, a very famous noise, and it made us all feel very proud.
Beetson, beautiful pass back to Lang, unloads to Meninga. Nicely to Close. Close accelerates and does beautifully right through the gap. He's been leading pointless. It's under the post for him.
Look, it finally injected some confidence in Queensland Rugby League. For so many years, we thought that we were a chance of beating New South Wales every year. That first game of every series, we used to think via the media that we were a chance of beating them. We used to be told that we were taking a game into that series that were some sort of hope. But you used to see Queensland with 10 or 15 minutes to go leading the Blues, but at full time we're always probably 20, 25 points behind, and you'd watch the crowd file out of the gates, and I mean, it used to be like a funeral. They'd go out of there and they'd be walking along, it'd be so quiet, they'd be just talking, at such a low level, saying, are we ever going to be any chance of beating this mob? The great disappointment was, so often, it would be a couple of Queenslanders that would destroy the Maroons. Beetson would come up with a couple of famous passes in the 70s, in the early 70s. I can remember watching him do that. And in the later years, I can remember watching one game where New South Wales beat Queensland 10-5. And the two tries that were scored by New South Wales were by John Rebo, and both of the tries were scored by his brilliant pace over about 60 or 70 metres. And that was at that stage, the crowd had had enough. They thought, that's it, we've just got to be able to get our players back at full time. We've got to have a full-time State of Origin series where we're able to have our Queensland players on board, and thankfully those times did come around.
Mortimer, yes!
Yeah, we started shooting our mouths off when it was 1982. We thought we're going to get all of our players back full time. We're going to have the Queensland players on our team. For 3 games, we've won the 80 series, the 81 series. What's it going to be like to have these players back for every game? And then, of course, 1982 started, and we were beaten in the first game. We thought we were in a bit of strife here. We've shot our mouths off a little bit too early. We're in a little bit of pressure, under a bit of pressure, and in some danger. But thankfully, we knew that we had to provide a little bit of spirit on the field, and we had to show exactly what sort of character we had as a football team. It did happen on the football field, and I think it was the younger players finally that showed that they had some ability on the field. It just wasn't the older players that originally showed that they were the ones that had the ability, like the Beetsons, the Rod Reddys, the Rod Morrises, all those sorts of guys. It was the younger players, the guys that were coming in, the new hopes like the Mark Murrays, Gene Miles, all those sorts of guys, the hope of the future, that were going to be the backbone of Queensland Rugby League that provided the success. Look, you could understand why New South Wales didn't take it all that seriously to start with. I mean, they had some of their best friends playing against them. For a Queensland team that were for so long the laughing stock of the Australian Rugby League in representative games. Arthur was playing against a lot of his Parramatta when they got a chance to see a full series. They expected that we'll beat them in the series then. There was that real sort of that jealousy that Queensland had had for so long, that if we had a chance, we'd be able to provide success for our fans. And I think all of a sudden there was that hatred between the media as well as the players and the fans. You could see it off the field as well. You used to read the papers and see the the stories were so different over the border. And I used to talk to some of the other players, and when we used to get in the Australian teams, we used to be a lot friendlier than what the papers used to declare what we were when we got in an Australian team. And I think one of the most important things was that once we got in the representative teams, we used to have to settle down a little bit and talk to each other and say, listen, the representative games are over, we are good friends again. But I've got to say, when we did play those State of Origin games, we weren't good friends. We had that interstate rivalry, and it became famous from '82 onward. And by '83, I think New South Wales had finally accepted that it was a true series. They really gave us a tough time, although we did manage to achieve success in '83 and '84. But by 1985. It was all about taking the pride away from Queensland and slapping us in the face.
Just moments away from an historic State of Origin series win. Here's Kenny. Kenny's on the line.
I was talking earlier about a couple of the younger players, finally starting to prove something on the football field for Queensland. The Mark Murrays, the Gene Miles, all these sorts of guys. They'd watched the Arthur Beetsons, and by the time they got into the Queensland colours, they were able to provide something on the footy field that was fantastic. And I think that by 1985, the New South Wales players, that's exactly what they were doing in reverse. A lot of their younger players had finally come through, and they thought, well, we've had a gutful of watching Queensland achieve success on the football field. We're not going to sit back and accept this. It's about turning things around for us. And they achieved it through fantastic performances on the field, and it was their younger players that were standing up to be counted. And some of the things that they didn't make us feel good in the Queensland side of things, but when you look back and have a look at the games in replay, it really was their younger players that were doing the things in the correct manner. The younger guys that were doing all the hard work, the more experienced players were steering them around the paddock, but it was the young guys that were fantastic performers.
Now, New South Wales in possession, but gee, they're only about 15 metres out. And there's a countdown on, 17 seconds. It's with Sterling. A long ball out there for O'Connor. Switching back inside. Keeping it alive now with Kenny. Kenny knocked down by Queensland. Tackle count should restart, but time will beat him, I think. Time will beat him. Queensland fans have gone crazy. Referee Domisor says that's it. That's the ball game. The Winfield State of Origin series has gone back to Queensland. Queensland have defeated New South Wales by 10 points to 8.
Yeah, we had Queensland had Wayne Bennett for a coach after we got beaten 3-0, and that was probably the worst period for Queensland Rugby League. The proudest for New South Wales, because that was the first clean sweep in a series. Wayne Bennett took over, and it was almost a situation where we were going to lose 3 series in a row. It was pretty tough for us. Bennett took over, and he probably got rid of the old style where we used to get into camp, get on the drink for a few days, and finally start to get serious, probably 2.5 days before the game. He really added some professionalism to the Queensland camp. Had us for a couple of years. Decided to get out because of his want to be associated with the Brisbane Broncos, and of course that came after the Canberra Raiders. But when we went back to Arthur Beetson, there was a little bit of, I suppose, a relaxation of our mood. We started to have a little bit of fun again, and I think Arthur was very calm with the players. He knew that there were still a few of the old boys there, and we still wanted to have a little bit of fun in camp. And he used to get in and say, "Listen, we're not going to be the old timers. We're going to have a bit of fun." But we always knew that Arthur was never going to be able to treat us differently and forget all about the manner in which we had quite some time ago. We had great respect for him, and I think that that was always the same in reverse. I think that if we provided for him on the football field, he was always quite able to just let the training slip just a fraction off the football field. There was always an extra game of touch for him. We used to allow him to score 1 or 2 tries on the touch field, and probably make sure that we got back in time for the roast pork at lunchtime. And he was just such a wonderful addition to the team, Beetson. You know, and I think the Queensland Rugby League, in making him a life member at that early stage, probably realised, you know, how fantastic he was to a lot of the older Queensland talent that were still around, and the next new wave of younger Queensland Rugby League talent that were coming through, the Kevy Walters, the Allan Langers, all those sorts of guys that were about to really be the big bonus for Queensland Rugby League.
Goodbye, Gisela, New South Wales, and it's a Queensland rain to Langer with a chance, Langer over, oh, Sterling missed him, and Langer was over.
Look, I played against Alf in the State League in Queensland. We had a fairly strong team, Winner Manly in Brisbane. We played against them the weekend prior to the selection of the Queensland team, and I must say we did defeat them quite heavily. And I spoke to Wayne Bennett. There was a meeting with the Queensland selectors, and they said, well, you know, we've got to bring some names up for the Queensland halfback position. Both Wayne and I said, well, these are a couple of names that are going to be available. And Alf at that stage was, you know, only in his first season of first grade there. Probably wasn't enjoying his best season of defence, or his best couple of months of defence. But you know, a lot of the selectors just simply said, look, he's a fantastic attacking player, which certainly wasn't a secret at that stage. And they said he's the bloke that's coming into the team. It was hands down, he was the guy that was going to be selected, and we had a meeting once the Queensland side had been selected. And I must say, I mean, I probably had some concerns simply because of his size. Everybody knew that he was a brilliant attacking player, and we had our first meeting when the Queensland side was picked, and I think you know, there was some worry about his ability to be able to stand up to the massive New South Wales forwards, and Fatty Vaughton just butted in at our first defensive meeting when we were talking about where he was going to be standing in the defensive line, and said, listen, he's wearing a bloody Queensland jersey. We don't have to worry about where we're going to hide him in the line, or where he's going to stand up, or, you know, who's going to assist him. He's simply one of our players. He won't let us down. No Queensland players ever let his teammates down, and this bloke's not going to let anybody down. And he turned around and looked at Alf and he said, and you're not going to be the first bloke ever to let another Queenslander down, are you? And Alf looked up at Fatty and said, no, I'm not, mate. And the rest, you know, as they say, is history. Alf never ever did let the Queensland jersey down. He simply went on to brilliant performances in his first game, and just simply got better from there. Yeah, the trip to the US was interesting for us. It was almost like a holiday for a lot of the Queensland guys. We'd virtually been put on the plane knowing that we had to put on a showcase game for rugby league. It was very important for us to do that, but it was a little bit unusual for us to get on the plane, and we had Wayne Bennett as a coach, who wasn't a guy that enjoyed watching guys drink. He was a guy that had never had a glass of alcohol in his life, yet we got on the plane, got on the drink straight away. The New South Wales team were up the front of the plane, or towards the front of the plane. They weren't allowed to drink all the way over, so it was quite obvious that they were very serious. They'd had a diet set for them on the plane. Our guys basically had relaxed a little bit. We got over there, and we were just concerned about putting on a game of rugby league to try and promote the game throughout the United States. When the game took place, it was very, very obvious that they were quite determined to beat Queensland. The game was telecast back to Australia. It was held up for around about an hour and a half. It was very hot in the States, and it wasn't a very comfortable game. Certainly a comfortable start for Queensland. I can remember Royce Simmons came in and grabbed hold of me and he said, "Mate, we've been told to bung on a blue." He said, "Just grab hold of me, make it look like we're belting the living daylights out of each other." And from then the game just continued on. We tended to get serious, but it was good to be able to try and promote the game throughout the US, but New South Wales was simply too good for us on the night. We tended to switch on a little bit too late, and that was after the blue. But they were very good that night. We got a chance after that, though, to be able to spend some time in the US. The Queensland Rugby League, through their generosity, gave us 3 days in Las Vegas. After we'd won the State of Origin series. New South Wales, unfortunately, had to go home around about 5 or 6 hours later. They were straight back on a plane, flew home to Sydney, but the Queensland team, by the generosity of Senator Ron McAuliffe and Ross Livermore and the QRL, got a chance to go to Las Vegas and had an absolute ball over there, and we got the chance to go home. So we've always appreciated what the QRL have done for us. They believe it's just been an opportunity for them to repay what we've provided for them and the Queensland Rugby League fans.
Back for Roach. Roach loses the ball, it's still loose. Picked up by O'Connor, he can't handle it. Who's got the football? Tedesco's got the football. And the referee says, well, they've scrum and the crowd are not happy. And there's a bit of a stink going on in the back play. They come in, oh, wait a minute. Lewis! Lewis came in 20 metres to get into that. Well, that's not on. And the cans are going onto the field too. And that's pretty stupid.
Yeah, getting sin bin at Lang Park wasn't something that I expected at the time. It came after Greg Canescu got the living daylights belted out of him. He had a couple of the New South Wales players set to him. Phil Daly was one of the players that was on top of him, and I think there was 1 or 2 other players that made life uncomfortable for him at that stage. I ran in from about 20 metres away to try and give him some sort of assistance. Turtle wasn't doing all that well for himself. He had the ball in one hand and was trying to fend off the punches coming at him. Obviously, all of the players got involved in the brawl. There was 2 touch judges came in to explain the incident. The Queensland touch judge was 15 metres away from the incident. The New South Wales touch judge came right from the other side of the field. The referee, Mick Stone, had the incident explained to them. The Queensland Rugby League touch judge said, I saw what happened, these players hit Canescu, this is what happened, and the New South Wales touch judge said, oh no, I saw what happened, Canescu started it and he started punching him, and then Lewis ran all the way in and started punching him. He said he actually instigated a further brawl, and I looked at him and he said, oh, yeah. And the New South Wales touch judge said, oh, yes, but this bloke started it. And I kept saying, and you can see it on the replay of the incident, I just kept saying, but he had the ball. But he had the ball. And he said, no. Canescu kept doing this. And I kept saying, no, hang on a minute, but he had the ball. And I'm thinking, how the hell could he get up and he punched him and then he did this when he had the ball in one hand and Phil Daly was belting the life out of him? And he said, okay, well, he said to Greg Canescu, you've got time in the sin bin and send him off. And then he turned around to me and he said, well, you ran in from 20 metres away to start another brawl and be involved. And I looked around and I said to Mick something like, oh, Mick, you're kidding, fair dinkum. And I said, you're going to believe this bullshit. Oh, Mick, turn it up. And I just wobbled my head and I said, you're kidding. And I looked at the bloke and I said something else as I went past him, which I can't repeat on the way off. And I walked off, and that's when, of course, all the cans started raining on the field. And I got a hammering by a couple of New South Wales newspaper journos the next day, which said that I actually instigated the riot. And one bloke said that I invited the crowd to throw the cans on the field, and I ended up going on on I think it was the Channel 10 news the following evening, when I think it was Steve Liebman was working for Channel 10 then, and I think he said to me something like, "Oh, Wally, so you invited the crowd to throw cans on the field?" And I think I said something like, no, I was getting sent off, and whoever was on with him said, but oh yes, but you did this, and you, and I said, oh yes, I said, as a matter of fact, I did. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I invited them to throw cans on the field. What I did was I got sent off, and I said I actually ran around. I got sin binned, and I actually ran around. I went into the dressing room, and I got a big piece of paper and a felt pen, and I ran around to the crowd and held up a sign, please throw cans onto the field now. I said, you're right, that's what I did. I said, you're quite correct there. And she said, oh, now you're being silly. Or something like that, and I thought, I'm being silly. I thought, oh, turn it up. I invited the crowd to throw cans on the field. I said, yeah, that's exactly right. I said there was a can ball after we got two blokes thrown into the sin bin when Greg Canescu got the living daylights belted at him. I said, yeah, you're pretty right about that. But I think it was pretty obvious what had happened. I thought we'd sort of struggled about it, but anyway, I'd spoken to the ref about it a couple of times after, and Mick and I have had some giggles about it, and I think he's sort of agreed since the incident that there may have been one story from one touch judge that was slightly exaggerated, and Mick's always agreed on that point.
Yeah, there's been a lot of injuries in this great game. It's been played at an amazing pace, but here's Wally Lewis with a stolen ball now. Lewis makes his way upfield. He's got some pace. Lewis, can he go all the way? Still going, he does throw. Wally Lewis has gone in, and look at this. Wow. We've said it before. This fellow is so incredibly strong. He doesn't look like he has the pace, but boy, oh boy, he just powered his way through the line there.
We were basically in a bit of strife in that game. There was nothing that went our way in that game. We'd lost a number of players during the first half. We lost Allan Langer with a broken leg. Mal, I think, broke his cheekbone. Fatty dislocated his elbow. Michael Hancock later dislocated his shoulder. Bobby Linder also broke his leg. You know, Queensland, I think we finished the game with 11, I think, on the paddock. But it was one of those games that Queensland actually deserved, you know, the famous Queenslander spirit tag that was that it's always been afforded to them. But you know, I got a lot of the rap for that try, but it came about through a famous Trevor Gilmeister hit on Bradley Clyde. They were bringing the ball away from their own line, New South Wales, and we'd been calling for the defence to lift. Gilly went forward and hit Bradley Clyde, who was one of the best runners in New South Wales, and the ball came free. Michael Hagan picked it up and just, you know, sheer instinct, Mick threw the ball wide. I got it, and I think, you know, I was straight against Chris Mortimer. I decided to try and run a little bit wide, and when I watch it now, I don't know why, but I'm dummying passes inside and outside, and there's no one around me. I don't know who the hell I'm dummying at, and I just decided to run on the outside, and I just had a look at the New South Wales players, and they were sticking man-on-man defence. I think I had Laurie Daly on the outside, and he wasn't going to leave his man alone. In the end, he had to virtually dive and try and make some effort to try and stop me, but I got into open spaces, and I looked up, and there was only one bloke in front of me. It was Gary Jack, and you know, I looked forward, and I knew that Jimmy was in a bit of trouble, because I'd virtually I knew I had him at that stage, because Gary had a broken arm, and I decided to run to his left hand side, because he'd had some trouble with it, and I'd previously had some difficulty with a broken arm on a couple of occasions. So I decided to take him on that side, and I thought that I was going to get there. I thought that if he was going to show some strength, it would have been on the other side. So I got him on that side, and you know, I got there. It was, you know, just a moment that I think if I was asked to do it again, I could never get there, basically, because I couldn't run that far ever again. but it was a very lucky moment. Fortune, you know, smiled on the brave, basically because of what Trevor Gilmeister did, and you know, the opportunity that was provided for me from Michael Hagan. His sight and instinct just naturally threw the ball wide to give me a chance. But you know, from there, Queensland thankfully held on. But I've got to say, from that moment, I can remember Queensland holding on, but that I regard as the proudest moment of my life, and not because of that try, but when we walked off, I stopped the Queensland team. I said, "You've got to stop and have a look at this." I said, "We're getting a standing ovation." I said, "You will never, ever get a standing ovation in Sydney again. The Queensland team will never, ever get a standing ovation in Sydney again." I said, "Lap this up." I said, "Never ever forget it, guys." I said, "Because you're never ever going to get this again." And the players all looked around, and I still remember it, and the New South Wales, the public, were all standing up, clapping Queensland off the field, because we did finish the game with virtually 11 blokes on the field. And I regard that as one of the proudest moments of my life, for what the New South Wales public afforded to the Queensland team.